Hello, my name is Jessica Sack. This is a research proposal on a cost-benefit analysis on genetically modified food labeling in the United States. My research question is, what is the best genetically modified food, GMO, labeling policy strategy for the United States? First, I would like to begin by defining exactly what a GMO is. Encyclopedia Britannica Online defines a GMO as an organism whose genome has been engineered in the laboratory in order to favor the expression of desired physiological traits or the production of desired biological products. The EU defines GMO as an organism with the exception of human beings in which the genetic material has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally by mating and or natural recombination. Did you know GMOs for agriculture were first created in the US in 1995, and by 1999 almost 50% of all corn, cotton, and soybean crops planted in the US were genetically modified. By 2002, more than 60% of processed foods consumed in the US contained GM ingredients. By 2010, GM crops covered more than 3.8 million square miles of land in 29 countries worldwide. GMOs are used to increase crop yields, resist disease and pests, reduce costs for food and drug production, enhance food quality and nutrient composition, increase food security across the globe, and some GMOs have medical benefits for the world's population. So, as I'm sure you all are aware, there has been recent hype over GMO controversies. First and foremost, human health risks have been a concern for some. Exposure to new allergens. The thought behind this is that GMOs are newly created and people may develop allergies to them. For example, there has been a recent hype that GMO wheat may be the cause of some cases of gluten intolerance. Horizontal gene transfer occurs when there is movement of genetic material between unrelated species, which often happens in bacteria. In laboratory setting, horizontal gene transfer occurs between GMO plants and gut bacteria, which is scary for some people. GMOs were introduced in the 90s, which was not that long ago. People fear that their long-term effects have not been observed yet. Religious beliefs sometimes conflict with eating GMOs, especially if genes from a forbidden food are used to create a GMO. There are many ecological concerns surrounding GMOs. One example is herbicide overuse leading to herbicide-resistant weeds. And then finally, Monsanto has been criticized for being unfair to farmers, which has raised some moral concerns for some people. Who cares? This year has proven to show increased concern over GMOs. In January 2013, the New York Times conducted a telephone interview survey to determine the American view on GMOs. The survey included 1,052 adults across the country, whose numbers were randomly selected by computers. Both landlines and cell phone numbers were used. Each region of the country was represented in proportion to its share of all telephone numbers. They found that 93% of respondents believed GMOs should be labeled. In October 2013, Rutgers University conducted an online survey which included 1,148 participants. The data reported was weighted to be nationally represented, and they found that 73% of respondents believed GMOs should be labeled. And then furthermore, with all the hype in the news, people in the food supply chain, they want to know what's going on. What are the policy options? Well, no labeling, no additional costs for consumers or anyone else involved. Secondly, there's a voluntary labeling option, which is what's currently going on in the US. Companies whose products are GMO-free may label their products as long as they are able to prove that their claim is true, and then only the consumers who value non-GMO food pay increased costs. Thirdly, there's the mandatory labeling option, which has two subsets, contains GMOs, the positive subset, or negative labeling, which is GMO-free. These options would be defined by the government if a mandatory scheme is implemented. Companies are required to label their products under this scheme, and all consumers would be affected and would pay increased costs associated with labeling. Who would be affected? Consumers, farmers and grain handlers, GMO seed manufacturers, processed food manufacturers, retailers, and regulatory agencies. What are the costs and how will they be weighed? Market segregation, standardization, testing, certification, and enforcement would all be new costs, and they're all comparable to the same costs that occur in the organic industry, which is where we can quantify them. Furthermore, the GMO-free project currently certifies GMO-free products for certain companies, and they would be able to define costs for us. Successful labeling policies go hand in hand with public education when new labeling policies are implemented. The costs of public education for a new labeling policy are comparable to those like the USDA's nutritional label and the organic label, and so we could get numbers from them to determine how much it would cost to do a GMO label. Increased farming costs are potential costs that stem from the idea that GMO crops are cheaper for farmers to maintain during the growing season, since they are made with goals to resist pesticides and herbicides and increase yields. This cost is a variable cost that varies from year to year and from crop to crop. Farmers, some researchers, and agricultural extension stations know the production cost for each year and are able to predict the cost for the upcoming year, which is how we would define those costs. And as I will explain in the next few slides, the benefits of GMO labeling will be valued through willingness to pay auctions. In these auctions, participants will bid on GMO and non-GMO potatoes, corn, tortilla chips, and beef. For the purpose of this study, the difference in production costs for GMOs and their conventional counterparts will be calculated for these three items, not for all GMO crops and all non-GMO crops, just for the three items I listed. And then increased costs to consumers can be calculated by comparing uncertified products to certified GMO-free products prices. Benefits. So basically the benefits of implementing a GMO labeling policy would be the reduction in risks associated with GMOs. And hopefully, for those that are concerned about environmental and economical externalities, those would be decreased. So quantifying a decrease in risk is difficult. I decided to do that through contingent valuation surveys and willingness to pay auctions. Contingent valuation surveys have been historically used to quantify non-market values such as the environment. In this study, contingent value studies will be sent out to randomized households and administered over the phone to randomized telephone numbers. The goal of the survey is to capture the true value customers place on reducing the risks associated with GMOs and to forecast the market potential for GMO labeling. Willingness to pay auctions will have the same goals as the surveys, but will provide the participants with non-hypothetical situations. Using both the surveys and the auctions, how best to account for any biases created by the nature of either experiment. The survey and auction will be used to place the values on benefits of implementing a labeling policy, which will be weighed against the cost of implementation. So as I said before, we're going to randomly call people. We're going to randomly mail to people, so this way we can extrapolate our data to the whole population. 2,000 surveys will be mailed, 2,000 phone calls will be made. Survey content, 3 parts. There is a meta-analysis of 25 studies. that reported valuations for GMO foods by calculating the willingness to pay of consumers. That meta-analysis found that responses varied based on socioeconomic characteristics. In particular, a participant's education, age, gender, and income significantly affected their response. For that reason, that is the first part of the survey. The second and third parts include a close-ended question and a payment card question. I'm using two different approaches so reliability can be tested. Close-ended questions resemble market choice, and they avoid over or under bidding, which is usually associated with open-ended surveying, which is why I did not choose it. Additionally, I did not choose open-ended questions because they tend to get a large amount of blank responses, which was something I wanted to avoid. So, the first question will be, consumers might have to pay additional costs to purchase items not containing genetically modified ingredients due to additional segregation, production, testing, certification, and labeling costs. Suppose you walk into a grocery store and you have the option to purchase non-genetically modified foods alongside genetically modified foods. Would you be willing to pay X premium for the following items? The value X in this question would vary from 10 cents to $3 in 10-cent increments randomly in each survey. The options are yes, no, don't know. And we are including a GMO-free bag of potatoes, a GMO-free corn tortilla chips, GMO-free beef sirloin. The reason why I chose these three items is the meta-analysis that I spoke about before claims that consumers have different willingness to pay for produce versus processed food versus meat. So I wanted to include items from these three categories. Secondly, there's a payment card question. Again, I'm doing two different approaches to finding out the same thing so I can test for reliability. Second question, suppose the price of GMO potatoes is $5 per 10-pound bag. The price of GMO-free potatoes will be higher than $5 but has not been determined yet. What is the most above the current price of $5 you would be willing to pay for GMO-free 10-pound bag potatoes? The participant is given various premium ranges from 10 cents to $3. And this question is asked about potatoes, tortilla chips, and beef sirloin. Next, we're on the willingness to pay auctions. The auctions recruit their participants randomly via digital calling to cell phones and landlines and mailing to addresses in survey areas. The methods are designed to recruit 165 to 190 participants for each survey location. Sorry about that. There will be 3 treatments replicated 4 times at each location, 13 to 16 participants per treatment group, all 18 years or older, and 5 different locations across the U.S. And this is completely different set of participants than the surveys that I spoke about earlier. I decided to use an nth price auction for these willingness to pay auctions. I did that because they guarantee a truthful willingness to pay bid because the price is randomly chosen and the winner is not chosen by the competitiveness of the bid. So, the way that they work, each of K bidders simultaneously and discreetly places a bid on each item. Bids for each item are ranked in order from highest to lowest. The auctioneer picks a random number ranging from 2 to the number of participants. The auctioneer sells 1 unit of the item to each of the n-1 highest bidders at the nth price. Example, n equals 6. The 5 highest bidders are sold the item at the 6th highest price. Only one of the rounds is binding in each treatment. Items available are, again, potatoes, beef sirloin, and corn tortilla chips. Each item is clearly labeled, contains GMOs, does not contain GMOs, and stripped of its original packaging to avoid brand bias. Participants are given a high incentive to participate, and a pre-auction questionnaire is given to determine that valuable demographic information I was talking about before. And the reason for the high incentive is we want to make sure that the people with high opportunity costs show up. Second, willingness to pay treatments. The baseline treatment. First round, all GM foods with labels get bid on. The second round, all non-GM food counterparts with labels get bid on. Second treatment, information treatment. Participants are given neutral information about GM food with all possible assets and drawbacks in a random sequence. The first round, randomized selection of GM and NGM versions of food. The second round, same 3 food products with different label from first round. Example, round 1 items would be GM potatoes versus GM beef versus NGM corn. Second round, NGM potatoes, NGM beef, GM corn. The uninformed treatment would be the same as the information treatment, except they're not giving the information about GMOs. This does that so we make sure that we're not biased based on the information given before the study. Policy implications of GMO survey and willingness to pay auction. So once we get all this information of the market demand and the willingness to pay, if those two things are greater than the cost of implementation, then labeling should occur. If the ratio of consumers concerned about GMOs to those that are indifferent is low, then voluntary labeling will happen. If the ratio of consumers concerned about GMOs to those that are indifferent is high, then mandatory labeling is suggested. If market demand and willingness to pay is less than the cost of implementation, then no labeling is suggested. Research challenges and limitations. Okay, my first challenge is finding study locations and participants for auctions. The reason for that being, previous auction studies have been performed in metropolitan areas, but thus far I've not found one that has been done in multiple locations across the U.S. My thought behind having multiple auction locations was to have a representative sample of participants that could be reasonably extrapolated into the general population. Additionally, locations where the economy is significantly depends on GMO crops or farming may have significant different results than those that do not. A limitation. I decided that including the policy implications on effects of international trade would be a completely different research project in itself. After reading some literature, I found that implementing a labeling policy is more dependent on consumer utility than on international trade. The EU's current laws on GMOs is an example of a country that took the same stance. And then so far I have not found data directly from the USDA that defines production costs for GMO crops versus their non-GMO crop counterparts. I currently work for an agriculture extension campus, and I'm aware of the plethora of knowledge researchers at these stations possess. I believe that approaching extension workers, farmers, and researchers should give the information that I need to value these costs. If not, there are other methods to determine the difference in cost by extrapolating from current USDA data and other research papers. And then another limitation, in an attempt to remain focused, I decided that this study need not survey for specifics about opinions. A lot of the literature out there focuses on why consumers choose GMOs or GMO-free products. Ultimately, the study aims to find out if consumers want labeling and if they're willing to pay for it. And that is all. Thanks.